Good afternoon, everyone. As I've been introduced, my name is Mark Neller. I work for Arup as a director in our program and project management team. I'm actually a mechanical engineer by background and have spent my career delivering major energy projects across distribution and transmission within energy and gas. So just taking through the slides, a little kind of introduction to Arup. If you don't know Arup, started by Ove in the 1940s, probably most well known for iconic buildings. Actually employee owned, so we have a huge amount of independence and freedom to pursue the projects that we like and the interests that we have. And the latest kind of manifestation of that is the decision that we made as a company to adopt the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as our definition of shaping a better world. So because we're employee owned, we're able to put money that we make as profit back into research and development. And in 2017, we made the decision that we'd like to have a look at where we thought the energy system in the UK might be in 2035, halfway through the transition from 2017 to 2050. So when we look at the whole energy system from that whole system perspective, we think about it through four lenses. We think about it from an engineering challenge. So what are the technical difficulties that we have to overcome in transforming the energy system? How do we deliver it? What are the management challenges and the coordination challenges that need to be overcome? What are the economics and regulatory issues that need to be overcome in order to allow investment to take place and for the money to flow? And then finally, thinking about the system from a consumer's perspective, from a people's perspective, and from a behavioural perspective. And our view was that if you think about the transformation of the energy system, anything that you come up with as a solution has to be able to stand up to a test against those four lenses. So we brought a group of people together from across the firm and some academics, and we held a series of workshops. We looked at what we thought the drivers for change were, and we came up with this map that looked at where we felt the energy system would be halfway through the transition. It's broadly split into electricity, heat, and gas on the right-hand side, and then you've got production, transmission, distribution, and end use. And kind of, I guess the broad themes there were we were seeing further decentralization of electricity, further growth of renewables, much wider use of much greater variety of end use. We were seeing much more variety in the way in which heat is delivered into homes, and we also were seeing much more diversity in transport. I think the thing that stood out for most people a couple of years ago when we first published this was the fact that we'd included such a substantial role for hydrogen in the future energy system. And broadly that's because when we looked at energy use in the UK, you see that about a sixth of it is from the energy vector, about a third of it comes from transport fuels, and about half of it is delivered through the gas network. So our view was it was incredibly difficult to see how you could, in the space of such a short period of time, do away with the gas vector. And if you were going to decarbonise it, to us it seemed that the most obvious and likely choice of decarbonising gas was through the use of hydrogen. And so we have a report that goes along with this diagram that explains the thinking that we went through and the key trends that we identified as a result of that roadmap. In May of last year, the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies produced a quite detailed report looking at the decarbonisation of heat challenge and more broadly the role of hydrogen. And the report concluded that it was likely that the hydrogen route was going to be cheaper than an electrification route, but they felt that it was unlikely to be successful because it required major strategic decision-making by government. It required an overall vision of the role of hydrogen, and it required a huge amount of coordination across the supply chain. So we thought in 2018 we would use our Invest in Arup research and development funding to have a crack at doing something about this and see what role Arup could play in terms of solving some of those problems. So the first thing that we did was we worked with a lot of people in this room actually and across the firm to define what we meant by the hydrogen economy. And as has been explained through a number of the presentations already today, we're starting on the left-hand side here with the production of hydrogen, suggesting that there are a number of sources by which hydrogen can be produced. You've got the methane reforming process and you've got the electrolysis process. That hydrogen then needs to find its way through to the locations where it's needed, through transmission and distribution. It needs to be stored. And then there's a whole variety of end uses that hydrogen could be used for. It can be used for power generation, it can be used in industry. In fact, actually some of it could be coming from industry. It can be used in consumers' homes, and there's a whole variety of transport options for hydrogen as we've already heard through today. So we produced our report with, as I've said, a whole variety of different stakeholders coming and joining us for a series of workshops. And we deliberately picked people from right the way across the hydrogen supply chain and a variety of different government departments as well. And we decided we'd have a bit of fun with it. So we kept government and industry apart. And we tried to get people to think differently about the problem of hydrogen from the way in which they think about it in their normal day jobs. So one of the things that we did was we split people into a series of groups. We had a hydrogen producing team, we had a hydrogen transmission and distribution team, and an end use team. And we put them through a Dragon's Den process. So we asked them to think about pitching for £500 million worth of investment into a hydrogen economy project with their particular skills. And we made them come up with a business plan, and then we made them coordinate with one another in order to make sure that their business plans actually stacked up across the entire supply chain. And that produced some really interesting results. And that was pretty much how we spent the morning. We then spent the afternoon thinking about, well, if those are the business plans that we've come up with, what do we need to do to actually turn them into reality? What's the enabling policies and changes in legislation that are required in order that we can make those business plans stack up? And as a result of that, we've produced this hydrogen roadmap to 2035. We've considered all of the issues from policy, stakeholder engagement and communications, hydrogen production, infrastructure, transport, industry, heating, integrated solutions, and the impact on the UK economy. And there's a report that you can download from the Arup.com website that contains this roadmap and the associated report. The key themes that we pulled out: you need to incrementally build up the supply and the demand. The two things have to go hand in hand, and in order to make the economics work, you've got to do the two things together. Otherwise, you end up building some very, very large hydrogen production facilities for which you've got no customers, and you've got a huge gap to overcome whilst that plant's not being fully utilised. To us, it seemed the most obvious place to start was, as has been alluded to earlier today, with buses and public transport and return-to-base fleets as very obvious, very visible signs of the movement of hydrogen and getting the public used to the idea of hydrogen. So we've suggested we need a very early commitment from government that says any new vehicles or any new transport modes that are used for public transport must be zero emissions, and in those situations where electric battery storage doesn't work, that will drive up the demand for hydrogen solutions. We then suggested that blending an industrial decarbonisation via an establishment of regional hydrogen hubs was the right way to go. So rather than going big bang for some kind of massive conversion programme first, seems to us to make much more sense to start with a series of local regional hubs, such as the HyNet project. We had a look at hydrogen production, and we felt that constrained renewables in particular locations, especially in Scotland, offers a great solution. In other locations where you've got the infrastructure, then reforming methane with CCS is a better route to go down. And we kind of see that certainly over the next few years, you're going to get a combination of both of those solutions. In terms of conversion, we feel there's a need to gather more evidence for 100% conversion. We need to try and reduce the dependency on one big single government decision for all of this. It needs to be far more incremental. We need to build consumer acceptance, develop the right market models, and we have to use the next 5 years in order to actually see large-scale implementations in order to prepare for what we need to do over the rest of the years. So the report calls for large-scale pilots and demonstrations at scale. It calls for communicating better public understanding of the need for decarbonisation of heat, in particular, but decarbonisation generally of the energy system, a coordinated research, learn lessons from overseas. The UK is generally in the lead in a number of these areas, but not everywhere, and there's certainly stuff that we could learn from overseas. We have to have the development of the policy and the market design to make this work. And we've then got to get the case made for jobs and employment. The Committee for Climate Change Net Zero report has some fantastic hooks in it for anybody looking at hydrogen projects. Particularly if you go and have a look at page 24, hydrogen is littered across this diagram. Finally, just a quick 30 seconds I have remaining. High for Heat, which is the project that we're running for government. That's all about safety case, demonstrating technical feasibility and consumer acceptance. And in the 20 seconds I have left, all I can say is that the safety case is looking really positive. We've just awarded the next phase of contracts for hydrogen appliances in the home. So I'm confident that by the first quarter of next year, we will be able to say that we can demonstrate to the satisfaction of BEIS it's safe, it's technically feasible, and that then leaves the third area, which is social proof. Can we get consumers to accept it in the homes, which is the area we absolutely have to move on to in the early 2020s. Thank you very much.